Hey guys, so today we're going to talk about ceilings and what is the best color to paint your ceilings depending on your project. Ceiling colors are very important because a lot of people will call them the fifth wall of your room. But oftentimes the answer is a lot simpler than you might think. And this house in particular is beautiful. It is big, it's massive, it has a lot of really interesting characteristics, but it's going through a big renovation, a big change. So before we talk about ceiling paint color, I think one of the most important things to touch on is the finish of your ceiling. So 9 times out of 10, I always recommend going as flat as possible on your ceilings. That's not an eggshell finish or a satin, either flat, ultra flat, or maybe a matte finish in some cases. The reason for this is the flatter the ceiling, the more it'll hide imperfections in that ceiling. So if there's any little bumps or nicks, a flat finish will help camouflage those as best as possible. And right now we're in the basement of this home, and it gives you a really great idea of where it started. I'm not gonna judge anyone's design choices, but this color with this flooring, it just doesn't seem to work. It feels a little dated to me. But more importantly, when we look at the ceiling, we see that a shiny paint was used. The finish looks extremely inconsistent, very streaky, and mainly it's because they didn't use the proper finish. They went with what looks like a satin finish almost. It has quite a sheen to it. The only time where you would maybe entertain the idea of a shiny ceiling is if you really know what you're doing. If maybe you're going for a really fashionista high gloss ceiling in a dining room perhaps, it could maybe work, but for most people, go as flat as possible. This is a room that's going to help exemplify what I'm talking about when it comes to picking the perfect ceiling color for your home. So in this room, we have tiles all over, the same exact tiles essentially, and then you have a drywall ceiling. And I'll show you right now on the screen, there is a beautiful white ceiling that is crisp and clean, and it contrasts really nicely with the tile. So this would be a good example of using a bright white ceiling, because not only is it going to give you enough of a difference between your walls and your ceiling, but it's also going to help reflect as much light as possible from those myriad of pot lights that were installed. So you're going to ensure that the bathroom is going to be as bright as possible. It's going to feel nice and clean. Now, one of the potential drawbacks of this decision is if you go with a bright white ceiling and your tiles are supposed to be white, they may look less white. And then you can see you almost have this gray effect on your tiles, which I think looks fine in person. But it's just something to be mindful of. If you want your walls or your tiles to look as white as possible, a bright white ceiling might work against that a little bit. But I think if you have enough contrast between the two, the look will be just fine. So this is another room that's going to explain the second option with ceilings. And this works perfectly if you're going with white walls. It is to continue the wall color onto the ceiling. So if you have white walls that you're working with, why switch things up and convolute things by going with a different white on your ceiling? It's much better to just continue it all the way up so you have this nice streamlined look. Everything is just uniform and really, really clean. And then you can also take it one step further and continue it onto the trim as well. What I want to do is talk to Natalie from NTI Painting and basically get into how they came up with the idea of going with the ceiling paint that they went with.
My name is Natalie. I'm one of the owners of NTI Painting. So we are in this business more than 3 decades. It's a nice big house, but walls were painted in semi-gloss, like some of the ceilings were too shiny. We decided just to paint everything flat. The color that they chose was off-white. They wanted the idea of white house. Customer, not me, decided just to paint the ceiling the same color. Suddenly the walls became whiter, because there is no comparison, one color to another. So just like it looked right.
So that's another big reason to consider keeping your wall color in your ceiling consistent, is if you're picking an off-white that has maybe a little bit of a noticeable undertone, you don't want that undertone to clash with whatever ceiling white you're going with. And chances are your pre-mixed ceiling paints that you get at the store, they may have a little bit of a bright, crisp quality, and in some cases they can lean gray or even a touch blue. The simplest solution sometimes is just to keep that all consistent, get that wall color on your ceiling, especially if it's all flat anyway, it's gonna look really clean and streamlined. So we got white ceilings, we got same as wall color ceilings. The last option that I can think of for most people are accent ceilings. And this is essentially just treating your ceiling as an accent wall to sort of bring your attention to that ceiling by picking a bolder color or a different shade altogether. This is a little trickier to pull off. You got to make sure you're picking the right color because the ceiling, which is going to be attached to probably an overhead light fixture, which means that color cast is going to sort of fill the room. So there is a little more thinking that needs to go into it, but the look can be wonderful. So that's ceilings. Here's another video that I'm sure you're going to love. I mean, if I had to guess, this was maybe a rental suite because we have the kitchenette here that's getting redone and everything's a little bit beat up. So